There are relationships where love does not disappear, it flickers. And that flicker can be more confusing than absence itself. Because when someone leaves, at least the wound has a shape. You can name it, you can grieve it, you can say, that person is gone. But when someone is warm one day and distant the next, when they are attentive when you're useful, interested when you're pleasing, generous when you're easy, and suddenly vague when you need something real from them, you do not always call that conditional. At first, you call it confusing. Then you call it timing. Then you call it your fault. And eventually, without realizing it, you begin to study the pattern. You study what makes them soften. You study what makes them pull away. You study which version of you gets the affection, the laughter, the reply, the attention. And then you study the version of you that makes the room go cold. This is where connection begins to change. It's not gone. It's not obviously broken. It's not defined enough to explain it, but still it's felt. It becomes something you have to keep earning. This is Caffeine and Clarity. Today, we're talking about when connection feels earned. Not earned through love or trust, nor through time and mutual responsibility, but earned through performance, through emotional calculation, earned through becoming very good at understanding the rules of someone else's approval. Human beings are remarkably good at pattern detection. We notice more than we think we do. A child notices which parent becomes tense when they cry. A partner notices which topics create withdrawal. A friend notices which parts of their life get celebrated and which ones get ignored. A person notices when warmth is given freely and when it only arrives after they behaved in a suitable manner for that other person. This is important because when affection becomes inconsistent, the mind begins searching for the formula, and you begin circling the same questions over and over and over. What did I say the last time that made them pull away? What did I do when they were affectionate? Was I too honest? Did I disappoint them? The questions go on and on. And maybe they never told you directly that their love had rules, but over time, you learn to sense them. And that's the strange thing about conditional attention. It does not always feel like being rejected. Sometimes it feels like being trained, not by instruction or threat, but by the slow realization that certain parts of you receive closeness and other parts seem to interrupt that closeness. This is where conditional attention becomes confusing because no one tells you you have to change. You just start adjusting because you want the warmth to come back. So if they perceive you as complicated because you drew a boundary, disappointed them or their needs, or simply by saying something truthful, the warmth changes. The air around the relationship chills. And once you notice it, you begin to make minor adaptations to ensure that it does not happen again. Not because you're manipulative or because you're weak, but because unpredictability creates anxiety. And when connection feels unpredictable, the human mind will try to make it predictable, even if the only way to do this is to control yourself. And this is where the internal trade begins. You stop asking, do I feel safe here? And you start asking, what did I do wrong? And that's a very dangerous shift because now the relationship has become a scoreboard of sorts. You're no longer simply experiencing the connection, you're now monitoring it. You are watching their face, listening to their tone, reading the pauses, measuring the energy, trying to detect whether you're still in good standing or not. And you may not even realize how exhausting that is until you spend time with someone whose love does not require so much interpretation, someone steady, someone whose warmth does not vanish every time you stop being convenient, who does not make you feel like basic emotional safety is a prize you have to win. Because when you're used to conditional attention, steadiness can feel almost suspicious. And that in itself reveals something. It reveals that somewhere along the way, closeness became associated with behavioral management. You learned that if you could be the right version of yourself, you could keep that connection warm. And that is not the same as being loved. That is being trained. And yeah, trained may sound harsh. And I don't mean that everyone who does this is sitting in a room plotting how to control you. Most people are not that deliberate. Most unhealthy dynamics are not built by a shoddy character who steeples their finger plotting your demise. They're built by patterns that go unnamed for far too long. Not always through cruelty. More often, it's through consistency. If every time you're honest, someone pulls away, and every time you're agreeable, they return, your mind begins to connect those dots, not because you're imagining it, rather because human beings learn through consequence. And in relationships, consequence is not always punishment. Sometimes consequence is distance. Sometimes it's warmth. Sometimes it's the sudden loss of ease in the room. And over time, you begin to study the pattern. You learn what gets you the closeness. You learn what costs you the closeness. You learn when to speak, when to soften, when to disappear, all to remain in the connection. And that can be confusing because part of you wants to remain in that connection. Maybe because it's familiar. Maybe because you still deeply care. But part of you aches to just be you and not have to watch what you say just to keep the peace. Because walking on eggshells can be exhausting. And so you may allow the relationship to continue for years, keeping up appearances, sharing messages and memories. And no one is the wiser. But you know this relationship is strained. You know you're no longer resting in connection. You're maintaining it. There is a difference. Resting in connection means that there is enough trust within it to be human. Maintaining connection means you're constantly checking whether your humanity is acceptable. And if you have to keep proving that you are worthy of warmth, then the warmth is not a home. It is a moment of reward. This is why conditional attention can become addictive, because it does not withhold warmth all the time. If it did, you'd probably leave sooner. The difficulty is that the warmth returns, and when it returns, it feels like relief. And because you were anxious, that relief can feel like intimacy. But relief is not equal to intimacy. Sometimes relief is just the nervous system exhaling because the punishment has stopped. And that is a sobering thing to realize, because many people are not chasing love. They're chasing the return of warmth that has been taken away. They're not trying to build connection. They're trying to get back the version of the relationship that made them feel chosen. So they keep trying, not because they want to betray themselves, but because they want the warmth to come back. And when it does, even briefly, it deepens the lesson. It emphasizes the reward system. And once you see the pattern clearly, you can't unsee it. That is the painful tragedy of conditional connection. It does not always feel like someone shutting the door in your face. It feels like someone leaving the door open, but making you smaller each time you walk through it. This kind of relationship can create so much self-doubt because the evidence is subtle. It can be explained away. They're tired or busy. I can be overthinking it. You can plug in whatever excuse, and it can sometimes be true. People do miscommunicate. Not every silence is punishment. Not every mood shift is manipulation. But a pattern is different from a moment. A moment deserves grace. A pattern deserves honesty. And if a pattern repeatedly teaches you that said connection depends on your performance, then you have to stop pretending that you are simply being sensitive. You may be perceiving something real. Ask yourself this question in clarification, not an accusation. Why do you feel like you have to earn basic emotional warmth within that connection? The goal is not to turn a relationship into a courtroom. The goal is to tell the truth. And sometimes the truth is simple. Some connections are not built on mutual knowing. And a person can live inside that dynamic for a long time, especially if they're used to earning love. Especially if they learned early that approval was safer than honesty. Especially if they learned that being easy kept people close. But eventually, something in you gets tired of calculating, of wondering, of feeling like one wrong move can change the emotional temperature of the room. And that tiredness is not weakness. It may be the beginning of discernment, because real connection does not require you to live as a detective. You should not have to spend your life studying someone else's shifting moods just to know where you stand. There should be room for repair, room for honesty and imperfection. And no, that does not mean everyone owes you unlimited access, endless reassurance, or perfect emotional availability. But in a healthy connection, basic warmth is not used as currency. Before we close, if this episode helped you recognize a pattern that you've been trying to name, I'd love for you to subscribe and leave a comment below. Have you ever felt like your place in a relationship was too easy to lose? You don't have to share more than you want to. One word, one sentence, or one honest reflection is enough. And if you'd like to support Caffeine and Clarity beyond listening, you can leave a donation or visit the shop and purchase something that feels meaningful to you. It helps support the time, thought, and care that goes into keeping these conversations alive. Here's your sip of the day. If someone's warmth keeps you guessing, you may stop feeling loved and start feeling trained. And maybe clarity begins when you stop asking, how do I earn my place here? And begin asking, why does my place here feel so easy to lose? This is Caffeine and Clarity.